"I'm taking half your millions, including your grandfather's estate," Victoria announced with a triumphant smile, her voice carrying across the courtroom like she was announcing winning lottery numbers. The confidence in her tone made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to remain composed in my seat at the defendant's table. "My name is Marcus Wellington. I'm 48 years old, and I never imagined I'd be sitting in a divorce court in Charlotte, North Carolina, watching my wife of 4 years attempt to steal everything I'd worked for my entire life." Victoria sat across the room with her attorney, looking like she'd already hit the jackpot. Her designer dress, one I'd paid for naturally, was perfectly tailored, and her auburn hair was styled in that sophisticated way that used to captivate me, but now made me nauseous. "Your Honor," Victoria's attorney continued, "my client is entitled to half of all marital assets, including the substantial inheritance Mr. Wellington received during their marriage." The lawyer's briefcase overflowed with documents, all of them detailing how Victoria planned to walk away with my grandfather's hard-earned fortune. I watched the courtroom spectators lean forward eagerly, clearly fascinated by what they assumed would be a massive financial windfall. Some were probably calculating the numbers mentally, wondering how much Victoria would claim. A few reporters had even appeared, drawn by rumors of a multi-million-dollar divorce involving a prominent Charlotte entrepreneur. Judge Harrison, a distinguished man in his 50s with graying temples, reviewed the initial paperwork with a neutral expression. He'd been presiding over family court for over 18 years, and I imagined he'd witnessed every scheme imaginable. But something told me he hadn't seen what I was about to reveal. Victoria turned slightly to flash me what she undoubtedly thought was a victorious smirk. The audacity made my blood pressure spike. This was the same woman who used to bring me breakfast in bed, who claimed she loved me for my character, not my bank account. 4 years of marriage, and it had all been an elaborate con. The courtroom felt suffocating with its heavy oak furnishings and the weight of legal proceedings pressing down. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of Charlotte traffic, people living their normal lives while mine was being dissected before strangers. I gripped my briefcase tighter, feeling the folder inside that would shatter everything. "Mr. Wellington," Judge Harrison addressed me directly. "Do you have any response to these claims?" I rose slowly, my pulse racing but my determination unwavering. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, when Victoria's greed would finally destroy her. "Your Honor, I believe there's something the court must examine." Looking back, I should have recognized the red flags much earlier in our relationship. Victoria had swept me off my feet during a particularly lonely period in my life. I just turned 44 and was managing my architectural firm, Wellington & Associates, with considerable success, but little time for companionship. My grandfather had been my closest confidant until his death 2 years before I met Victoria, and I was still mourning his loss when she appeared at a charity gala in Asheville. She was stunning, charming, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my work designing sustainable commercial buildings. "You're brilliant," she'd say, watching me review construction plans. "I've never met anyone who understands spatial design the way you do." At the time, I thought she was impressed by my creativity. Now I realized she was calculating my net worth. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants and romantic weekends. Victoria worked as a marketing coordinator for a small non-profit, but she always seemed comfortable with luxury. "I believe in experiencing the finer things in life," she'd say when I questioned her expensive tastes. I was flattered by her appreciation for quality, not realizing she was already planning her long-term financial strategy. When Victoria accepted my proposal after 10 months, I was ecstatic. My grandfather had always warned me about women who seemed too interested in material things, but Victoria was different, or so I thought. "Life's too precious to waste on hesitation," she insisted. "I know what I want, and I want you." Her acceptance was gracious, a candlelit dinner at the most exclusive restaurant in Charlotte with a string quartet playing classical pieces. The ring was exquisite, costing more than most people's annual salaries, though I didn't mind at the time. My attorney, Robert Chen, had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Any successful businessman needs protection, he'd explained. It's not romantic, but it's essential. I'd felt uncomfortable bringing it up with Victoria, worried she'd think I didn't trust her or that I prioritized money over love. But Victoria's reaction was perfect. She laughed and brushed it off like it was trivial. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever gives you peace of mind. I'm not marrying you for your money. I'm marrying you for the man you are. She signed the papers without even scanning them, joking that love doesn't need legal fine print. Her casual attitude convinced me that my concerns were baseless. It's just a romantic technicality, she'd said, scrawling her signature with flourish, like promising to love, honor, and cherish, but with more legal language. I remembered feeling relieved that she was so understanding, so willing to ease my worries. Robert had been thorough in crafting the agreement, protecting not just my existing assets, but any future inheritance or business expansion. Your grandfather's estate will eventually pass to you, he'd reminded me. This ensures it stays in your family where it belongs. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now, I realized he'd been absolutely prophetic. The real revelation came 14 months into our marriage when I received the call about my grandfather's estate. He'd left me everything: his mansion, his investment portfolio, his collection of vintage cars, and $3.2 million in carefully managed accounts. It was far more than I'd ever anticipated, and the inheritance transformed my financial situation overnight. Victoria's reaction to the news had been telling, though I'd missed the significance at the time. Her eyes had literally sparkled when I told her about the money. $3.2 million, she'd repeated as if she couldn't quite process it. Marcus, we're wealthy. The way she said "we're" should have been my first warning. From that moment forward, Victoria's spending habits changed dramatically. She quit her nonprofit job within 4 months, claiming she wanted to explore new opportunities and support my success. What she actually did was spend my money like it was her personal shopping fund. She bought designer clothes for networking purposes. She invested in a friend's boutique without consulting me, losing $25,000 when the business failed within 8 months. She booked expensive spa retreats, joined an exclusive fitness club, and started dressing like she'd always been wealthy. Every time I questioned a purchase, she'd remind me that we're partners, and that spouses should trust each other with financial decisions. The breaking point came 8 months ago when I discovered Victoria had been telling people at the country club that the inheritance was our family money. She'd started introducing herself as an entrepreneur and philanthropist, conveniently forgetting to mention that all her investments were made with my grandfather's carefully preserved wealth. When I confronted her about her lies and her spending, Victoria became defensive and then vicious. "You act like it's some big secret that I married up," she'd snapped. "Everyone knows you needed someone like me to enjoy life. Before we met, you were just a lonely workaholic with no social skills." Her words stung because there was truth in them. I had been lonely, and Victoria had brought excitement and sophistication into my life. But I realized she'd been playing a long game, positioning herself as my salvation while systematically planning to claim everything I'd inherited. The final straw came when I found emails between Victoria and her attorney discussing divorce strategy. They'd been planning this for months, timing it to maximize her potential settlement. Victoria had even researched North Carolina's divorce laws, looking for ways to claim that her emotional support and lifestyle contributions entitled her to a larger share of my assets. That's when I'd finally contacted Robert again and filed for divorce myself. I refused to let Victoria control the narrative or the timeline. If she wanted to fight over my grandfather's money, I'd give her a battle, but it wouldn't end the way she expected. Now standing in this courtroom, I was ready to show Victoria and everyone else exactly what her greed had earned her. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the manila folder that Robert had prepared for this exact moment. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Victoria's confident expression faltered slightly as she watched me approach the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I believe the court needs to review this document before proceeding with any asset division discussions." Judge Harrison extended his hand and accepted the folder. "What is the nature of this document, Mr. Wellington?" "It's a prenuptial agreement, Your Honor. One that my wife signed before our marriage 4 years ago." The change in the courtroom atmosphere was immediate and electric. Victoria's attorney, a sharp woman named Diana Foster, shot up from her chair like she'd been electrocuted. "Your Honor, we were not made aware of any prenuptial agreement. This is highly irregular." "Sit down, Ms. Foster," Judge Harrison commanded, already opening the folder. "I'll examine the documents and determine their validity." I returned to my seat, keeping my eyes focused on Victoria. Her face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching terror in the span of 30 seconds. She was whispering frantically to her attorney, gesturing toward the judge's bench. I could make out fragments of her urgent words, "He never mentioned." And, "How is this possible?" Robert Chen, my attorney, remained perfectly calm beside me. He'd been preparing for this moment for months, ensuring every detail of our strategy was airtight. "Just watch," he whispered to me with a small smile. Judge Harrison was a methodical reader, taking his time with each page of the agreement. The document was comprehensive. Robert had made sure of that 4 years ago. It outlined exactly which assets were protected, which debts would remain separate, and most importantly, how any future inheritance would be handled. "This appears to be a properly executed prenuptial agreement," Judge Harrison announced after several minutes of careful review. "It's dated 5 weeks before your marriage, witnessed by 2 notaries, and signed by both parties." Victoria's attorney looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. I realized that Diana Foster had filed this divorce case without doing basic research. She'd assumed, just like Victoria, that the marriage was a straightforward cash grab. "Your Honor," Victoria suddenly stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "I need to see that document. I don't remember signing anything like that." The judge's eyebrows rose at Victoria's outburst. "Mrs. Wellington, please remain seated and allow your attorney to handle these proceedings." But Victoria was spiraling now, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. "Marcus, what is this? You never told me this was some kind of legal trap." "Mrs. Wellington." Judge Harrison's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "You will remain silent or I will hold you in contempt. Your attorney may request to review the document through proper channels." Diana Foster approached the bench with obvious reluctance. I watched her examine the prenuptial agreement, her face growing ashen with each page. She returned to her table and began whispering urgently to Victoria, who was shaking her head in disbelief. The courtroom spectators were now fully engaged, sensing that something dramatic was unfolding. I could hear muffled conversations and the scratching of reporters' pens as they tried to capture every detail of Victoria's public humiliation. "Your Honor," Diana finally addressed the court, her voice notably lacking its earlier confidence. "My client would like to request a brief recess to review these documents more thoroughly." Judge Harrison checked his watch. "Ms. Foster, did you not conduct discovery regarding potential prenuptial agreements before filing your asset claims?" The attorney's silence was answer enough. Victoria had been so confident in her strategy that she'd never even mentioned the possibility of a prenup to her lawyer. Diana Foster had been blindsided just as much as her client. "I'll give you 10 minutes to review the document," Judge Harrison declared. "But I should warn you that this appears to be a legally binding agreement that significantly impacts your client's claims." During the recess, I watched Victoria and her attorney huddled in intense conversation near the courtroom windows. Victoria's gestures were becoming more animated and desperate as Diana explained the implications of the prenuptial agreement. Even from across the room, I could see the exact moment when Victoria realized her plan had completely backfired. Robert used the time to review his own notes and prepare for what he knew would be Victoria's last-ditch attempts to challenge the agreement. "She's going to claim fraud or duress," he predicted quietly. "Women like Victoria always blame everyone else when their schemes fall apart." He was right. When court resumed, Diana Foster immediately launched into a desperate legal argument. "Your Honor, my client believed she was deceived about the nature of this document. Mr. Wellington presented it as a romantic formality, not a comprehensive asset protection agreement." Judge Harrison looked distinctly unimpressed. "Ms. Foster, are you claiming your client signed a legal document without reading it?" "Your Honor, my client trusted her husband to be. She believed he was being honest about the document's scope and implications." I had to bite my tongue to keep from scoffing. Victoria had always prided herself on being a savvy woman, someone who could read people and situations. Now, her attorney was arguing that she was too trusting and naive to understand a legal contract. "The document is clearly labeled as a prenuptial agreement," Judge Harrison observed, flipping through the pages. "It includes standard warnings about seeking independent legal counsel. Did your client choose to waive that right?" Diana shuffled through her papers nervously. "Yes, Your Honor. My client waived her right to independent counsel and the document was reviewed by a notary public, correct? With your client present and confirming her identity?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Harrison turned his attention directly to Victoria. "Mrs. Wellington, when you signed this document, did anyone force you to do so? Were you under any kind of duress or coercion?" Victoria's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "No, Your Honor, but I thought it was just paperwork. Marcus made it sound like it didn't matter." "Did you read the document before signing it?" The question hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. Victoria looked around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route. The silence stretched on until it became uncomfortable for everyone present. "Mrs. Wellington, I asked you a direct question." I skimmed it," Victoria finally admitted, "but Marcus said it was just a formality." Judge Harrison's expression was a masterpiece of judicial disapproval. "Mrs. Wellington, you signed a legal document without reading it after waiving your right to legal counsel, and now you're asking this court to invalidate it because you didn't take it seriously?" The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing, mesmerized by Victoria's public humiliation. I felt a surge of satisfaction watching her squirm under the judge's scrutiny. "Your Honor," Diana made one final attempt. "Perhaps we could argue that the agreement is unconscionable given the disparity in—" "Ms. Foster," Judge Harrison interrupted. "Have you reviewed the financial disclosures included with this prenuptial agreement?" Diana flipped through the document again, clearly searching for something she'd missed. "There are extensive financial disclosures here, Your Honor." "Indeed, there are. Mr. Wellington provided complete documentation of his assets, income, and expected inheritance. Your client signed acknowledgments confirming she reviewed and understood all financial information. This is one of the most thorough prenuptial agreements I've seen in my 18 years on the bench." Victoria looked like she was about to be sick. The beautiful woman who had charmed her way through life was finally facing consequences for her actions. Judge Harrison cleared his throat and began reading directly from the prenuptial agreement, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Section 4, Paragraph A, all assets owned by either party prior to marriage shall remain the separate property of that party. Section 4, Paragraph B, Any inheritance received by either party during the marriage shall be considered separate property and shall not be subject to division upon divorce. Victoria's face went through a spectrum of colors, red to white to green. She gripped the edge of her table so hard her knuckles were white. "That can't be legal," she muttered loud enough for several people to hear. Section 6, Judge Harrison continued, addresses spousal support. Quote, "Neither party shall be entitled to alimony or spousal support from the other, regardless of the length of the marriage or the disparity in income." This section was initialed by both parties and witnessed separately. Diana Foster was frantically taking notes, probably trying to find any possible loophole or technicality. But Robert had been too thorough 4 years ago. Every potential challenge had been anticipated and addressed. "Your Honor," I stood up. "If I may address the court." "Proceed, Mr. Wellington." "When I inherited my grandfather's estate 14 months ago, I consulted with my attorney about whether the inheritance was protected under the prenuptial agreement. We confirmed that it was fully covered under Section 4, Paragraph B. The inheritance has been kept in separate accounts and has never been commingled with marital assets." This was the final nail in Victoria's coffin. Not only was the prenup ironclad, but I'd been scrupulously careful about keeping the inheritance separate. There was no way for her to claim any portion of it. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. "Mr. Wellington, did you use any portion of your inheritance for marital expenses or joint purchases?" "No, Your Honor. I maintain my regular income for household expenses. The inheritance has remained completely separate." Victoria exploded. "That's not true. He bought things for us. He paid for vacations." "Mrs. Wellington." Judge Harrison's voice was ice cold. "You are out of order. Sit down immediately." But Victoria was beyond reason now. Her carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. "This is insane. I've been with him for 4 years. I supported him emotionally. I gave up my career." "You quit your job to spend my money," I said quietly, unable to help myself. "Mr. Wellington," Judge Harrison warned, but his tone was almost amused. Diana was tugging on Victoria's arm, trying to get her to sit down and stop making things worse, but Victoria was in full meltdown mode, her true nature finally showing through. "He trapped me," Victoria shouted. "He made me think we were partners. He let me believe that money was ours. Mrs. Wellington, if you cannot control yourself, I will have the bailiff remove you from my courtroom." The threat of being physically removed finally penetrated Victoria's rage. She sat down heavily, her chest heaving with angry breaths, but the damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom had seen her true character, the greedy, entitled woman who had married me for my money and then had the audacity to act like a victim when her plan failed. Judge Harrison reviewed the final pages of the prenuptial agreement with deliberate care. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited for his ruling. I felt a calm satisfaction settling over me. After months of Victoria's manipulation and lies, the truth was finally coming to light. Based on my review of this prenuptial agreement, Judge Harrison announced, "I am ready to render my decision on asset division." Judge Harrison removed his reading glasses and looked directly at Victoria with an expression that could have frozen molten steel. "Mrs. Wellington, this prenuptial agreement is valid, comprehensive, and legally binding. You are entitled to exactly nothing from your husband's premarital assets, inheritance, or business holdings." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Her mouth fell open, and she stared at the judge in complete disbelief. "Nothing," she whispered. "Nothing," Judge Harrison confirmed. Furthermore, according to Section 7 of this agreement, all debts incurred individually by either party remain the responsibility of that party. "Mr. Wellington, do you have documentation of debts incurred solely by your wife?" Robert handed me a thick folder which I passed to the bailiff. Yes, Your Honor. Credit card debts, the failed boutique investment, spa treatments, and country club fees totaling approximately $73,000. Victoria's attorney looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. The case she'd thought would net her a substantial fee had turned into a complete disaster. Mrs. Wellington, Judge Harrison continued, not only will you receive no assets from this marriage, but you remain personally responsible for $73,000 in debt that you accumulated during the marriage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers. I could hear someone behind me stifle a laugh. Victoria had gone from expecting millions to facing bankruptcy in the span of 30 minutes. Your Honor, Victoria's voice was barely audible. This can't be right. 4 years of marriage has to count for something. Judge Harrison's smile was razor sharp. It does count for something, Mrs. Wellington. It counts as an expensive lesson in reading legal documents before signing them. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. The court grants the divorce petition filed by Mr. Wellington. No assets shall be transferred to Mrs. Wellington. All individual debts remain with the party who incurred them. This court is adjourned. Victoria sat in stunned silence as the reality of her situation sank in. She'd spent 4 years positioning herself for this moment, only to discover that her plan had been doomed from the day she casually signed the prenuptial agreement without reading it. People began filing out of the courtroom, but I remained seated, watching Victoria's world collapse around her. Diana Foster was already packing her briefcase, clearly eager to escape this professional embarrassment. Several reporters approached me for comment, but Robert intercepted them with practiced efficiency. Marcus, Victoria called out as I finally stood to leave. We need to talk about this. This isn't over. I turned to face her one last time. Victoria, it was over the moment you decided to marry me for my money instead of loving me for who I am. The prenuptial agreement didn't ruin your plan. Your greed did. Her face crumpled as the full weight of her situation hit her. No inheritance, no assets, and crushing debt that would follow her for years. The woman who had charmed her way through life had finally met a situation that couldn't be sweet-talked or manipulated away. As I walked toward the courtroom doors with Robert beside me, I felt lighter than I had in months. The nightmare was finally over, and Victoria's true nature had been exposed for everyone to see. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came with its own sense of poetic irony. Victoria's life unraveled completely in the months following our divorce. The $73,000 in debt forced her into bankruptcy within 5 months, destroying her credit and making it impossible for her to maintain her lifestyle. Her reputation in Charlotte's social circles was ruined when word spread about how she tried to steal her husband's inheritance, making her a cautionary tale about prenuptial agreements and the dangers of marrying for money. The country club revoked her membership when she couldn't pay her dues, and her designer wardrobe was sold to pay creditors, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her dating life became non-existent as men in our social circles learned about her gold-digging scheme, warning each other about the beautiful woman who viewed marriage as a business transaction. She was forced to move in with her elderly mother in a small apartment and take a minimum-wage retail job, her dreams of living off my grandfather's money replaced by the harsh reality of starting over at 35 with nothing but debt and a damaged reputation. I used a portion of my protected inheritance to establish the Wellington Foundation, which provides legal assistance to men seeking prenuptial agreements and divorce representation, ensuring that other men wouldn't fall victim to financial predators like Victoria. Looking back on my journey from trusting husband to empowered divorcee, I realized that my grandfather's wisdom about protecting family wealth had saved me from more than just financial loss. It had saved me from a lifetime of being used by someone who saw my love as nothing more than a pathway to easy money.